in addition to being the best-selling author of the Gibson Vaughn series, Matthew FitzSimmons is an avid traveler, a theater and English teacher, and a fan of bourbon. Looks like he knows how to have fun. Matthew FitzSimmons, welcome to Thriller Talk.
Thank you guys so much for having me on. How are you both today?
Well, man, how are you doing?
Good, good. Just surviving the news, surviving the day here. But I'm very happy to be here and to get away from it all. I like your backgrounds. It's very soothing and therapeutic. So thank you. You got my very boring office background. I do not have the technical acumen for sunset oases. So thank you for that.
Pleasure. Well, we actually offer, thriller questions along with psychological support. So,
anyway. Here, my teddy bear.
So, speaking of which, writers tend to observe people, which allows an author to capture the human essence to use when creating the protagonist and antagonist. And I love the fact I actually have a very international background myself, and I love the fact that you do too. And I wonder if you use those international experiences and pull from them when you create your cast of characters.
That's an interesting question. I mean, I would guess that every author uses everything that they've experienced when writing. I think it all goes into the melting pot. I think that that traveling has broadened I was born in a small town outside of Chicago, Wheaton, Illinois. And when I was, 3 years old, my father, who had just started at a bank, he had just graduated college. Sometimes you forget how young your parents are when they had you. My dad had just graduated from Syracuse, and he graduated with a divinity major and wasn't sure what he was going to do with his life. And someone said, "Weren't you the treasurer of your fraternity?" And he went, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, you should go into banking, because that's how things worked in the 1960s. That's all you needed. You didn't need a master's degree. You didn't need a business degree. I was treasurer of my fraternity at Syracuse." So we went into banking. 2 years later, they transferred us to London. And I spent 8 years growing up in London. And I can't even imagine how different that fork in the road, how different your life is based on, because my dad's boss went, "Hey, FitzSimmons, you're going to London." He didn't say, "Hey, Johnson, you're going to London." He said, "Hey, Fitz." Anyway, so, my experience base obviously changed a lot. And then I spent 2 years living in China in the 90s. And I always credit, it was a strange time for me, going to China. It was the mid 90s. China was just beginning to open to the West. I am 6.5 feet tall. I was the first white person that many, many, many hundreds of thousands of Chinese people ever saw. And I was the first one they saw because I was 6.5 feet tall. So everywhere I went, I was followed, I was touched, I was looked at, I was photographed. It was like, when I walked down the street, it was like the circus had come to town. And it gave me a real perspective. It gave me perspective on being the other. I don't know if that makes sense. You're being not, in America, no one really pays any attention to me. I'm just, I just wander around in my little cone of being an American white man, and no one really notices me. In China, that was a really valuable, I think it gave me a sense of, I think on that experience a lot when to come back to your question. I know I went a long way to get there, but I think that experience of being, treated as the other really helped me when I was writing Constance, and trying, a lot of the book is about this woman who is a clone, who is not always greeted with open arms and is greeted with suspicion. And I really drew on that to try and craft what her experience was going to be like.
Well, Matthew, excited to talk to you. When did you know that you wanted to be a writer, and what made you finally take the plunge to actually like go for it?
Well, I took three. This was my third plunge. This was my third and final plunge. My first plunge was when I was 12 years old. I got in eighth grade. I got an assignment to write a 10-page story, and I wrote a 60-page story. Um, and I borrowed my mother's stencil kit. She was an interior designer to do like a. This was before printers. That's my age. I've just aged myself. It was all handwritten, and I borrowed my mother's stencil so I could do like a fancy cover as a fantasy story, and I misspelt the title, and I handed it in, and my professor said, my teacher said, "Who's what's the Magian spurt?" I went, "No, the Magian spirit." So I didn't write again for about 12 years. That was the end of chapter one. I didn't handle that very well. I spent my 20s. I tried to write a novel. Tried to write the great American novel. I spent about 4 or 5 years working on it, waiting tables, playing the starving artist, and I got done, and it wasn't very good. It wasn't sellable. And I was 28, 29 years old, and all my friends were graduating from graduate school, buying houses, getting married, and I was waiting table and had 500 pages of unsellable. And at that point, I was like, I had that. Okay, well, I'm done. I'm done with that, and I put writing aside, and I didn't write again for a decade. And I was going through some things in my early 40s, and I was having a bad time in my life. And I started writing what became the short drop just as a way to have something that I could control. I don't know if that makes sense to you guys. That just like it was a world that I could escape to and write and control when everything else was kind of on fire. And it turned into the short drop, and I got an agent, and he sold it, and I've been writing ever since. So I like to say I'm an overnight sensation, 25 years in the making. Oh, sensation is strong. Overnight success, 25 years in the making. But I've always had a need for a creative outlet. I had long ago given up on ever making it a career, and just feel incredibly lucky, and sort of like can't quite believe that I got a third, really a second bite at the apple. And I'm, just really happy to be able to write for a living. It's unbelievable.
And I love that you find it cathartic because I agree. It's sort of like, you can control this alternate universe. You're in charge. And there is, like, and I think, especially in today's world with COVID and everything else that's going on, I think we feel a huge loss of control, and to reestablish that or to lose yourself in a world where you do have control for a few hours a day.
Right.
Now,
I know how things are going to turn out. And it's a great relief. Like I have no idea what's happening in the real world, but I do know in my current book exactly how it's going to end. I just have to write it. It's very safe. It is very cathartic.
so your book Constance delves into the world of cloning, which I find absolutely fascinating. I love science. Can you share a few kind of tidbits from your research and what is realistic given today's technology?
So one of the nice things about writing thrillers is how generous people are with their time when you're like, hey, can I buy you a drink or a cup of coffee and pick your brain about your area of expertise for an hour? And so often people are like, yes. So I got to talk to, I had to talk to a bunch of lawyers because I really wanted to get, the sort of the book is set in 2040, so it's only 20 years from now. So I really wanted to get that right. I talked to some engineers at Bell Labs. I talked to some neuropsychologists at Johns Hopkins. I got to talk to some people who are much, much smarter than I am. And what I came away with was that almost everything cloning wise that I am talking about in the book is something that we will, I think, have in time. Uh, we're already, one of the interesting things, we're already doing human cloning in this country every day. There are no federal laws governing cloning. It's a states issue, as it's described in the book. But every time we duplicate a stem cell, that's cloning. Like, we are cloning all the time. What we don't do is make another Matthew. That's sort of like like everyone, that's a no-no, and we won't do that. But the ability to clone a human being, that already exists. Like, that's just a matter of someone crossing that bioethical line. The big part in the book that's sort of more speculative is sort of is the idea of consciousness mapping, consciousness storage, downloading or uploading, and storing a consciousness. That is on the way. Like, they are already doing work on that area. I think the big fib in my book is that I basically postulate a scientist who sort of jumpstarts the process and gets us there faster than we would. I mean, I have us there, within the next 12 years. I think more realistically, we're 30 to 50 years from like putting all that technology together and going. I just didn't want to. I wasn't interested in writing a book that was so far away that it felt just. I'm not smart enough to imagine 2070. 2040 was about. I don't know. It was about the as much as my grasp was willing to risk and feel comfortable saying things about that. So, but all that technology is either in the works or already exists, and my guess is like it will it will come, if not in our lifetimes, and in our children's lifetime.
Both exciting and terrifying, to be honest with you.
You pretty much just described all of science right now. I mean, if you watch the reaction to like this new generation of vaccines that are all using this like new technology, and it's interesting, having written the book, and I wrote the book before the vaccines, but like watching the reaction to that, like there's just the vaccines are so complex that I don't understand how they work. I'm a reasonably intelligent person. I'm pretty well read. I don't understand how they work. Most of us, I don't think, do know how they work. And watching that, like, I can understand the idea of an old-fashioned vaccine, right? The old vaccine, which is like, we take some of the disease, we give you a little bit of that, and and we help you build up an immunity to it. That's not what they're doing anymore. Like, it's so, like, they've jumped, and watching that sort of the societal anxiety about that, science it has become scary. It's become beyond our ability to even wrap our minds around what's happening. So
I just feel like if they could clone me, I definitely want a younger version of me. That'd be the first thing. If that were possible, I might get on board. I actually have a different sort of sci-fi question for you, if you don't.
Okay, hit me.
Is this true that your father slept through the theatrical release of Star Wars?
Man, there are moments in your life when you realize that you are likely adopted. I mean, my dad is not a big movie guy. He's a very traditional dad in that he reads nonfiction and histories and like that stuff he devours, but he doesn't really read fiction. Doesn't really watch TV except for sports, and he doesn't really watch movies. Like, that's just not ever been. So I, who have watched every movie that has come out from the dawn of time until just yesterday, so we, but the first big, so we were in England, and we'd been in America, in Indian River, northern Michigan, with my grandparents all summer, and Star Wars came out, but it didn't come out in anywhere near Indian River. So we didn't see it. There wasn't a movie theater up there to go to. And we went back to England, and back in the day, now the new Marvel movie comes out and it releases everywhere in the world simultaneously. Back when I was a kid, a movie would come out in America, and then it would come out in Europe, 6, 8 months, a year later, depending on the demand for it. And so we went back to England, and England and Europe had watched Star Wars explode in America, but it was nowhere, and the energy level and the excitement about going to Star Wars in England, who couldn't see it, was just out of control. My dad got us tickets for Star Wars opening night. It opened in Leicester Square in London on Christmas Day. And we had tickets for Christmas night. They were like the big Christmas present. We got Star Wars tickets. I don't know how we did it. And he took us, and I am 7 years old. I am, like this the whole way through. It is the greatest thing that has ever happened. I'm 7 years old. I can die now. This is amazing. And I look over, and my dad, when he sleeps, does one of these. And I'm like, what are you doing? How? Now, in his defense, he'd been up all night, like putting together, all the Christmas presents, because they all come with assembly required. So in deference to Tom Fitzsimmons, he'd probably had a long night the night before, but still, it hurt. It hurt a lot. That was the last time we went to the movies together ever. I've never been to a movie with my dad since Star Wars. That was good enough for me, and I think for him too. He was like, "Nah, this really isn't for me."
That's a fascinating story. So I wanted to ask you, with respect to your influences, who are the authors that really have had a profound, effect on you want to be a writer, and what type of writing? And who would you most want to have lunch with, dead or alive, if you could?
Oh, wow. Dead or alive. So I'll work up to that one. I mean, my influences, I'm a huge Don DeLillo head. Particularly in my 20s, I sort of read all of his books. I think one of the reasons the book that I wrote when I was in my 20s wasn't any good was I was trying to be Don DeLillo Jr., and there's only one Don DeLillo, and that's plenty. Um, just adored his prose and his insights. From thrillers, it's interesting. Probably my biggest influence in terms of thrillers and writing tension is an English author named Ian McEwan, who's a literary author, and I don't think necessarily gets enough credit. He is one of the most suspenseful, tense, anxiety-producing writers I have ever read. Books like Comfort of Strangers, Enduring Love, Child in Time. So he just. Comfort of Strangers is a book about a couple who goes on vacation in Italy and gets involved with a very strange man, and things just go very badly. And it's a very literary, beautifully written book, but at the heart of it, it's a noir. It's like just bad things are happening to this couple, and he's absolutely brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant at capturing the minutia of like human interactions in a way that I just I'm blown away by. If I could pick one author to have lunch with, dead or alive, it would probably be James Baldwin, who I was an English teacher for 12 years, and I taught Notes of a Native Son and Giovanni's Room and a bunch of his books to 12th graders. And he is, when I started teaching him about 20 years ago, it's been nice to sort of watch this like rediscovery of a man that I think is just one of our two or three most important writers of the American writers of the century. And his reputation kind of plateaued after his death in the early 80s. He had sort of fallen out of favor in the civil rights movement in the 70s, and he sort of went through this period where people weren't reading him as much, and now he is back. They're making documentaries about him. I think awareness of him, but his writing he speaks better than I can write. I don't know if you've ever seen an interview with him. He just speaks extemporaneously, like better than if I wrote it down for a week. The man was so so smart and so compassionate and so loving and so full of hope. I think that would just be a fascinating person to sit down and like have the privilege of just listening to talk better than I can write. Like, teach me, Mr. Baldwin.
Well, on that note, out of all the books that you've written, is there one that you look back on as maybe more challenging to write? And if so, why?
Well, it was the second one. Uh, Not necessarily for subject matter, but because when I wrote my first book, which was a short drop, I was writing it in secret. Like literally, I didn't tell anyone I was writing it because I tried to write my novel in my 20s and it didn't go very well. And it was a little embarrassing when you like take your big swing and you sort of fall flat. There's a sting to it. So when I started again, I didn't want to tell people because I was sort of like, they're like, "Ooh, you're not really doing that again. Really? You're 41. I think it's time to like let that go, my friend." And so I did that very secretly, and I was doing it on the weekends. And I was a teacher, so I had summers off. So it was really just for me. And I took 2.5 years to finish, writing in between work and all the rest of it. And we sold it, and I was very fortunate to get a 2-book contract. And my publisher said, "Great, we want another one. We want this one in 11 months. Go." And I went from and it was a crash course in the difference between writing because you feel like it and writing because it's your job. And it was a learning to be a professional, learning to, I stopped teaching. I was writing full time, and I didn't know how to I discovered I didn't know how to be a professional author. And it's just a different skill, and it's a different set of muscles, and it's a different discipline for sure. Like there were no days off. Like when I was writing, I was like, "Oh, I've got a grade today. I'm not going to write." Or it was like, who cares? It's just for me. So that was, I think, the hardest book I had to write was just that was. I always look back on Poison Feather as the book where it's like, well, that's the one where you learned the difference between being like doing it, being an amateur and being a professional.
Well said. So we touched on this earlier that you really love theater. How does that dramatized world help you as an
Um, I think it's given me a good ear for dialogue. I mean, I when I when I was in high school and college, when I sort of turned away from writing, I was sort of being glib when I said I wrote a book when I was 12 and then didn't write again. What I really did was I got involved in the theater in high school, studied it in college, and then when I finished college, I went to New York to try and become a director. I directed a couple of things off Broadway, worked for a producer, was sort of like paying my dues and in that mold before I decided that New York and the theater was not in fact for me. But the theater and plays, being a director, it is, it's someone else's words, but you take it, any given rehearsals, you sort of sit down and you sort of look at the scene and the dialogue, and you have to say like, okay, how is this scene going to play? What are the tensions? Thinking about it in terms of beats and who's winning, who's winning the scene, who's in control, who's got the ball, who's in control. These are all things that apply very easily to directing a scene. The nice thing is that that your characters don't get to take the afternoon off or go back to their dressing room because they're in a bad mood. Like that, they have to stay and they have to listen to you most of the time. And I just think that was of great use to me. And then the other thing that I think it's been really useful for is I like, I don't know how you guys are, but I have a friend who's a writer who writes his book, doesn't talk to anyone about it, doesn't show it to anyone, and is like, it's over here. And he doesn't want to hear anything. He doesn't want to talk to anyone about it. I'm kind of the opposite. Like, to me, the best thing about directing was we got 4 or 5 actors and a director and a stage manager, and we're all talking about it. We're kicking ideas around. Like directing a play is more like a writer's room. Like you're just kind of like, okay, who's got the best idea? Who's got what? And I've never had a problem. Like I will write something and show it to someone the day I write it. I have no. I'm like, what do you think? Like, I have smart friends. I have smarter friends than I do, and I love getting them involved and talking to them about what I'm writing, and they are so far been kind enough to play along and talk back. So
Well, we've talked a little bit about the places that you've lived. So Illinois, London, New York City, China, now Washington D.C. Where has been your favorite place to live? And did you ever find that you were more productive as a writer in any one location than the other?
ooh, that's a good one. That's a really good one, Ryan. I think my childhood in London was pretty idyllic. It was, it was London in the 1970s. It's really hard to capture what London was like for people then. Uh, you know, Particularly who people have been to, London post 1990. But I think the thing that people forget is that London and England were still in a depression post World War II in the 1970s. I think I read a statistic, only 60% of people in England had refrigerators in 1975. It was a country that was still very much recovering from, there was still bomb damage from the Blitz on buildings. It was basically like it was, a lot of things just had not changed in 30 years. And London was a very quiet town compared to what it is now. It was also back in the era when children could do anything they wanted. I wandered around London at 7, 8 years old, all by myself, just on my bike, cruising around, doing whatever. No one, I was 8 years old, hanging off a London bus, with the pole, the double decker English bus. I think back on this, and I would go up Kensington High Street, hanging off the bus at 35 miles an hour. And no one said, hey, maybe the 8-year-old shouldn't be hanging off the side of the bus, because no one cared. No, children weren't at that point special or fragile or bubble wrapped. It was like you could do whatever you wanted, and that was. So London, it was magic. It was just a magical time, a magical place to grow up for me. As far as writing, I really have done the bulk of my writing here. I had an apartment over in Chinatown when I first started writing that had a roof. And during the week, it was a roof, it was like trellised and covered, and there were benches and like little wooden tables. And I would just go up there and work. I was on the top floor. I would walk up with my laptop, sit on the roof, and I could like look out over the city of Washington and just write all day. So to sit outside, and that's probably the most productive I've ever been. Absolutely loved that place.
Sounds like a perfect location to definitely play. Now, in your career, you've covered a lot of ground, had a lot of success. But what accolade would you like to receive that would mean the most to you? Is there something that you would just be like, "Hey, that is the best"?
I I feel like I feel like I'm going to say something cheesy. Uh, because I am of the opinion that awards are very much, or to an extent in our business, something of a popularity contest. They are a little bit of a, they're either PR managed or I don't get the sense that everyone has read the books that are necessarily winning. I've never really felt all that attached to awards. I mean, yeah, I'm not going to say the name, but I think the highest honor I would get is if and picture in your mind's eye your hero, right? You get that like random email from that person, and they're just like, "Hey, that was fantastic. Like that would be it. Like that would be the best award you could get. Like that person didn't even know that they're your hero, and they reach out and they're like, "Oh my God, your book was fantastic." I would just like, okay, and I know who that is for me, and I would just be like, okay, I'm done and I'm out. And but as far as awards go, like it doesn't feel, that stuff all feels very uh, fleeting to me, I suppose.
Well, I
Just
mean,
saying that one person could be watching. If you said who it was, they might shoot you an email.
But then it wouldn't work. Then you don't get the. I've just got to wait. I've got to lay in the tall grass and hopefully and wait for them to fall into my trap.
I hope it works out for you.
And for everyone here, may work out for all of us.
I would have thought, just because you're a film guy, that you would the answer would have been seeing one of your books brought to life on the big screen.
Oh, that's a good answer, Ryan. Damn it. That's a good one.
I'm just saying.
No, that would also be really, I mean, that's an interesting one, because it's like, you know, I having your film, your book made well.
Right.
Like there's two things. There's like obviously the financial security of like, okay, someone bought my book and they're making it something, and I'm going to be financially secure enough to continue writing. Like that's all very nice, but I think the real test is it a director that you're like, oh my God, Martin Scorsese is, that like something like that. Like that's where I think I would fall out of a tree. Like if that one of your filmmaking idols is like, I want to make this, then yeah, absolutely, really good answer, Ryan. I like that one a lot.
Your hero happens to be an actor. You can kill two birds with one stone here. Like
there you go.
That's like, hey, this is great. I also love to make it. I think where we're different is like if The Rock wanted to make a movie around Thriller Talk and play me,
Yes.
because I invited him to say it or send me an email, I would not care. Just give me the response, I'd be all in. But you gave a good answer too. Listen, before we let you go, now that your book Constance is set to come out, what's next for you?
I am, to my surprise, writing a second book in that world. That was not the original intent. Constance was intended to be a standalone and a one-off, and my publisher came to me and said, we like this quite a lot. We'd really like another one. I went, that's great. I don't have another one. And they went, well, that's too bad. Well, all right. Well, what else do you want to do? And I took a shower the next day, and by the time I got out, I had the entire plot laid out for the book I'm writing. It just was one of those, so like, oh, I've got it. I called them up and I said, I've got another one. And they said, you said you didn't have one. I said, no. I took a shower and I got it. And they're like, what? Okay, great. So I'm writing a second one. It's called Chance. And it's sort of a companion. It's not exactly a direct sequel. There are characters from the first one that will appear in the second one, but it is more of exploring the world that I built for the first one from sort of a different perspective and with a different slant. And I hope people will come along for it, because I'm pretty happy. I'm kind of excited about it, which I'm usually not at this point. Usually at this point I'm at the, well, this was the worst idea I've ever had. But right now I'm still like, okay, I like this. So, fingers crossed.
Well, Matthew FITZSIMMONS, thank you so much for joining us on Thriller Talk today.
Guys, thank you so much for letting me talk your ear off. That was fantastic. Thanks so much.
It's been a real pleasure.